The crowd's hateful stares pierced through Emma Langley like arrows as she walked down the dusty main street of Fort Worth, Texas, in the summer of 1873. The whispers followed her accusations that stung worse than the relentless Texas sun beating down on her shoulders. Emma clutched her basket tighter, her knuckles white with strain, knowing that the failed wheat crop wasn't her doing, despite what the townsfolk believed. She had never asked to be the center of such cruel suspicion, but superstition ran deep in these parts, especially when livelihoods were threatened. Xavier Northwood watched from the shadowed porch of the general store, his weathered cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes. He'd heard the rumors about the woman they called the Harvest Witch. Nonsense, all of it. But in Fort Worth, a town desperate for someone to blame after the worst crop failure in 20 years, Emma Langley made for an easy target, a young widow who kept to herself, growing herbs and selling remedies when the town's doctor was away. Emma's eyes stayed fixed on the ground as she approached the general store. She needed supplies, flour, sugar, coffee basics that would get her through another week of isolation at her small homestead on the outskirts of town. She hesitated before climbing the steps, aware of Xavier's presence, though she'd never spoken more than a few words to the tall cowboy. "Morning, Miss Langley," Xavier said, tipping his hat slightly. Emma looked up, surprised at the civil greeting. "Mr. Northwood," she responded cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. Before she could enter the store, a heavy hand grabbed her arm. Emma turned to see Mr. Pritchard, one of the largest landowners in the county, his face red with anger and the stench of whiskey on his breath despite the early hour. "You got some nerve showing your face in town, which," he spat. "My fields are dust because of you." Emma tried to pull away. "Please, Mr. Pritchard, I had nothing to do with the drought. I'm just here for supplies." "Supplies for what? More of your devil's work." Pritchard's voice rose, attracting attention from passers-by. "My wife says she saw you dancing under the full moon the night before the crops started dying." Xavier straightened, his 6'2" frame unfolding from where he'd been leaning against the post. "That's enough, Pritchard," he said, his voice low but carrying the weight of authority that came from years herding both cattle and men. Pritchard sneered. "Stay out of this, Northwood. This don't concern you. When you're manhandling a lady in public, it concerns any decent man," Xavier replied, stepping between Emma and her accuser. Emma felt her heart racing. No one had stood up for her since her husband died 2 years ago. Certainly not someone like Xavier Northwood, whose reputation as one of the most respected cattlemen in the county meant his words carried weight. "Lady," Pritchard laughed bitterly. "She's the reason we're all going hungry this winter. You know what they say, widows with knowledge of herbs bring nothing but trouble." Xavier's hand moved casually to rest on the handle of the revolver at his hip. "What I know is that blaming a woman for the weather makes about as much sense as trying to rope the wind. The drought affected 3 counties. Are you suggesting Miss Langley here has powers reaching all the way to Austin?" A small crowd had gathered now, watching the confrontation with the eager anticipation that only promised conflict could bring to the monotony of a weekday morning in Fort Worth. Pritchard, aware of Xavier's reputation as both a marksman and a man of his word, took a step back but wasn't ready to concede. "My crops are ruined. Someone's gotta pay. And it won't be her," Xavier stated firmly. "The way I see it, if you spent less time at the saloon and more time implementing those irrigation techniques they're using up north, maybe your crops might have stood a chance." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. Pritchard's drinking was no secret, nor was his resistance to modern farming methods. "You're defending her. What's she to you?" Pritchard demanded. Xavier's expression remained impassive, but his eyes, a startling shade of blue that contrasted with his sun-darkened skin, hardened. "She's a citizen of this town who deserves the same respect as anyone else. I won't stand by while a man twice her size threatens her for something no human being could control." Emma stood frozen, caught between gratitude and fear. Drawing Xavier Northwood into her troubles would only create more problems. She'd learned the hard way that in Fort Worth, keeping your head down was the safest strategy. "Mr. Northwood, please," she said quietly. "I can handle this." Xavier glanced at her, noting the quiet dignity in her stance despite the trembling of her hands. "I'm sure you can, Miss Langley, but you shouldn't have to." Pritchard, realizing he was losing both the argument and his audience, made one last attempt. The preacher himself said unnatural influences could be at work in this drought. Preacher Ellis also said charity and kindness were Christian virtues, came a new voice. The crowd parted to reveal Sheriff Thomas Walker, his badge gleaming in the morning sun. "Is this what passes for Christian behavior in Fort Worth now, Pritchard? Harassing a widow trying to buy groceries?" The confrontation might have ended there if not for Pritchard's wife, Constance, pushing her way through the onlookers, her face contorted with the self-righteous anger of the desperately afraid. "She cursed our land," Constance shrieked, pointing a bony finger at Emma. "I saw her gathering plants at the edge of our property the night before the crops started wilting. I was collecting yarrow for Mrs. Peterson's fever," Emma explained, finding her voice. "Her baby was sick. I told you this when you asked me then, Mrs. Pritchard." "Lies," Constance hissed. "What about the strange lights seen at your cabin? The odd smells? Everyone knows you're not natural." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, more threatening. Emma felt the familiar coldness of dread settle in her stomach. This was how it started in her former town, accusations that grew until they drove her out after her husband's death. Xavier had heard enough. In one smooth motion, he moved to stand fully in front of Emma, facing the crowd that had now swelled to nearly 30 people. "This stops now," he announced, his voice carrying across the town square. "You all know me. I've lived here 15 years, drove cattle with half your husbands, loaned money to some of you when times were hard. Have I ever struck you as a man who defends something evil?" The crowd shuffled uncomfortably. Miss Langley lost her husband and still managed to make a life for herself. She's helped many of you when Doc Miller was away, including your son last winter, Pritchard, when he had that cough that wouldn't quit. Pritchard had the decency to look away. "The harvest failed because we had the driest spring in memory, followed by those hailstorms in early summer. It happened up in Dallas too, and over in Abilene." "Did Miss Langley cause all that as well?" Sheriff Walker nodded appreciatively. "Northwood's talking sense. Now all of you go on about your business. There'll be no witch hunts in my town." But Constance Pritchard wasn't finished. In a move that shocked everyone, she lunged forward and slapped Emma hard across the face. "Devil's whore," she spat. The sound of the slap seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Emma's head snapped to the side, a red mark blooming on her pale cheek, but she didn't cry out. What happened next would be talked about in Fort Worth for years to come. Xavier Northwood, a man known for his measured responses and cool head, grabbed Constance Pritchard by the wrist as she raised her hand for another strike. "That's assault," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Sheriff, I believe you witnessed that." Sheriff Walker stepped forward. "I did indeed, Mrs. Pritchard. Consider yourself lucky if Miss Langley doesn't press charges." "For what?" "Defending our town from her evil." Constance struggled in Xavier's grip. "For striking another citizen without provocation," the sheriff clarified. "Mr. Pritchard, take your wife home. And keep her there until she remembers her manners." Pritchard, looking suddenly deflated, pulled his protesting wife away. The crowd, deprived of further drama, began to disperse, though the whispers continued. Xavier turned to Emma, his expression softening as he saw the red mark on her cheek. "Are you all right, Miss Langley?" Emma nodded, fighting back tears that threatened to fall. Not from pain, but from the overwhelming relief of having anyone stand up for her after so long. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to do that." "Actually, I did," Xavier replied. "My pa raised me to believe that when good people stay silent, bad things happen. I've stayed silent too long about how folks have been treating you." Sheriff Walker approached them. "Miss Langley, would you like to file a complaint about Mrs. Pritchard's behavior?" Emma shook her head. "That would only make things worse, Sheriff, but I appreciate the offer." The sheriff nodded, understanding. "Well, if you change your mind or if anyone else gives you trouble, my door's always open." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Emma alone with Xavier. "I should finish my shopping," Emma said, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Xavier nodded. "I'll wait out here, make sure there's no more trouble." "That's not necessary, it is," he interrupted gently. "At least for today. Tomorrow, well, we'll see what tomorrow brings." Emma studied him, trying to understand why this man, respected, wealthy by local standards, and undoubtedly influential, would risk his standing for her. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Northwood? You barely know me." Xavier looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes serious beneath the brim of his hat. "Because I've watched you these past months since you came to town, seen how you help others even when they turn around and whisper behind your back, noticed how you keep your head high despite it all." He paused. "And maybe because I know what it's like to be judged for circumstances beyond your control." There was a story there, Emma sensed, but before she could ask, the storekeeper stuck his head out the door. "Are you coming in to shop, Miss Langley, or just planning to block my entrance all day?" Emma hurried inside, her mind racing. Xavier Northwood had defended her, in front of the whole town. The implications of that were something she couldn't afford to dwell on right now. Inside the store, she felt the stares of the other customers. Mrs. Baker moved her children away as Emma approached the dry goods. Mr. Simmons, who usually chatted about the weather, suddenly found the tools section fascinating. Only old Mrs. Winters, whose arthritis had been eased by Emma's willow bark tea, offered a kind nod. Emma gathered her supplies quickly, placing them on the counter. The storekeeper, Mr. Collins, tallied her purchases with barely concealed reluctance. "That'll be $4.28, he muttered. Emma counted out her money carefully. It was nearly half of what she had saved from selling her herbal remedies, but she needed these supplies. As she handed over the money, she noticed her hands were still shaking. "I have the other herbs you asked for," she told Mr. Collins quietly. "The ones for your wife's headaches." Collins looked around nervously before accepting the small paper package she offered. "How much?" "Nothing," Emma replied. "Consider it payment for holding my mail when folks were suggesting you shouldn't." Collins had the grace to look ashamed. "People talk, Miss Langley, doesn't mean they're right." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." As she gathered her purchases into her basket, Xavier entered the store. Without a word, he picked up the heavier bags of flour and sugar. "I'll carry these for you," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request, but a statement of fact. Outside, the town square had returned to its normal mid-morning activities, though Emma felt the weight of hidden stares following them as Xavier walked beside her toward the edge of town. "You don't need to escort me all the way home," she said when they reached the crossroads where the main street gave way to the rutted dirt road leading to outlying homesteads. Xavier adjusted his grip on the supplies. "It's no trouble." My horse is stabled at the livery, which is on the way to your place anyway. Emma stopped walking. Mr. Northwood, while I appreciate your help today more than I can express, I don't want to cause you problems. People will talk. Let them, he replied simply. They'll talk regardless. It's different for you, Emma insisted. You have a position in this community. Business dealings. I'm just passing through Fort Worth until I save enough to move somewhere people don't know me. Xavier's expression darkened. Is that what you want, to keep running? The question struck her like a physical blow. Was that what she was doing? Running? I'm being practical, she said finally. 2 years in one place is long enough to learn that some minds won't be changed. First it was being a widow too young. Then it was keeping to myself. Now it's the drought. There will always be something. Not if people with sense start speaking up, Xavier countered, like I should have done months ago when I first heard the talk. They resumed walking, a tense silence between them. Emma was acutely aware of every inch of space separating them, of the strong profile of the man beside her, of the question that burned in her mind. How did you know where I live? She asked finally. You said it was on your way to the livery, but my cabin is nearly a mile outside town. A hint of a smile touched Xavier's lips. I make it my business to know my surroundings, Miss Langley. Your cabin sits near the creek that feeds into my eastern pasture. I've ridden past it many times. Oh, Emma wasn't sure if that explanation made her feel better or worse. Also, Xavier continued, his tone lighter, I brought you a side of beef last winter. You were sick with the same cough that was going around. You might not remember you had quite a fever. Emma stopped again, staring at him in surprise. That was you, I thought. I assumed it was Sheriff Walker being kind. He checks on me sometimes. The sheriff is a good man, Xavier agreed. But no, that was me. You needed to keep up your strength and game was scarce with the snow. Why didn't you say anything? I would have thanked you. Xavier shrugged, a gesture at odds with his imposing presence. Didn't do it for thanks. They had reached Emma's modest cabin now, set back from the road and partially hidden by a stand of cottonwoods. It was small but well-maintained, with a vegetable garden to one side and a small barn that housed her milk cow and a few chickens. Herbs hung drying from the porch rafters, and flower beds lined the walkway, touches of beauty in a harsh land that spoke of Emma's determination to create something lasting. Xavier set the supplies down on the porch. I should get back to town. Got business with the bank before they close. Emma nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him go. Mr. Northwood, Xavier, truly, thank you for what you did today. It's been a long time since anyone stood up for me. Something in her tone must have revealed more than she intended, because Xavier's expression softened. Your husband, he was a good man. The best, Emma confirmed. Memories of Thomas Langley flooding back his laugh, his kindness, the future they'd planned together before typhoid took him at 26. He would have done what you did today without hesitation. Then he would approve of someone else doing it in his absence, Xavier said quietly. Their eyes met, and Emma felt something shift between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. But she quickly looked away. Attachments were dangerous in her position. Will you be all right here? Xavier asked. After today, Pritchard is all bluster, Emma interrupted, and his wife, for all her talk, is more afraid of her own shadow than any supposed witch. They won't come out this far. Xavier didn't look convinced. All the same, I'll be riding this way tomorrow. Just to check the fences, you understand. Emma allowed herself a small smile. Of course, the fences. As Xavier walked back toward the road where he'd left his horse tethered, Emma called after him. Why didn't you believe them? About me being responsible for the drought, I mean. Everyone else seemed ready to. Xavier turned, the sun at his back casting his face in shadow beneath his hat. Because I've seen real evil in this world, Miss Langley. It doesn't look like a woman growing herbs and helping sick children." He paused. "And because sometimes it's easier for folks to blame a person than to accept that there are things in this life beyond our control." With that, he mounted his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that seemed as formidable as its owner, and tipped his hat before riding away. Emma watched until he disappeared around the bend, then gathered her supplies and entered her cabin. Only when the door was closed behind her did she allow herself to consider the full implications of the day's events. Xavier Northwood had defended her publicly. The ripples from that stone thrown into the still pond of Fort Worth's social hierarchy would spread far and wide. For better or worse, her life had just changed irrevocably. As she put away her supplies, Emma caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror hanging by the door. The red mark from Constance Pritchard's slap was fading, but something else had changed in her face, a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there this morning. It looked suspiciously like hope. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Emma went to the window and saw dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Rain was coming. Too late for this year's crops, but perhaps, just perhaps, a sign that the worst was over. The rain that began that evening continued through the night, a steady, soaking downpour that drummed on Emma's roof as she lay awake, replaying the day's events. By morning, the parched earth had drunk its fill, and puddles dotted the yard when Emma stepped outside to tend to her animals. The air felt different, cleaner, fresher, as if the rain had washed away more than just the dust. Emma took a deep breath, savoring the petrichor scent that rose from the damp ground. Her garden, struggling through the drought despite her careful watering, seemed to stand taller this morning. As she milked her cow, Buttercup, Emma found herself humming something she hadn't done in months. The tune, an old folk song her mother had taught her, spoke of new beginnings after long winters. It felt appropriate when she heard hoofbeats approaching along the road. Emma's hand stilled. She'd convinced herself last night that Xavier's promise to ride by was merely politeness, that in the light of day he would reconsider the wisdom of associating with the town pariah. Yet here he was, right on time, as the morning sun broke through the clouds. Emma quickly finished milking and smoothed down her simple blue work dress, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. She'd braided her chestnut hair in a practical style that kept it off her neck, but wisps had already escaped to frame her face. Xavier dismounted when he reached her yard, leading his horse. He looked different today, still every inch the cowboy in his practical clothing, but somehow more approachable without the backdrop of the town's scrutiny. "Good morning, Miss Langley," he called, his voice carrying across the yard. "Thought I'd check how you fared in the storm." Emma walked to meet him, carrying her pail of milk. "Very well, thank you. The rain was a blessing." Xavier looked around appreciatively. "Nice place you've made here. Land looks fertile." "It is," Emma agreed. "The previous owner let it go to ruin after his wife died, but the soil is good. I've managed to grow enough to feed myself, with some extra to trade in town." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like some coffee? It's the least I can offer after yesterday." Xavier seemed to consider this, weighing propriety against inclination. "Coffee would be welcome, thank you." Emma led him to the porch, setting the milk pail down before entering the cabin. "You can tether your horse in the shade," she called over her shoulder. "There's water in the trough." Inside, Emma moved quickly, stoking the cookstove and setting the coffee to brew. She took down her two best cups, mismatched but uncracked, and placed them on the small table that served as both dining and work surface. A quick glance around confirmed that the cabin was presentable, though hardly grand. When Xavier entered, ducking slightly under the doorframe, the space seemed to shrink around his tall figure. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly where it had been pressed against his neck. Without the hat shadowing his features, Emma was struck anew by the intensity of his blue eyes against his sun-darkened skin. "Please sit," she offered, gesturing to one of the two chairs at the table. Xavier complied, his movements careful, as if afraid of disturbing the peaceful order of her home. "You've done a lot with this place. Last time I saw inside, old man Jenkins had let it go to ruin." "You knew Mr. Jenkins?" Emma asked, pouring the coffee once it had brewed. Xavier nodded. "Helped him round up strays a few times before his passing. He was a decent man, just lost his way after Mrs. Jenkins died." "That happens sometimes," Emma said softly, setting a cup before Xavier. "Loss can hollow a person out." Their eyes met briefly, a wordless acknowledgment passing between them. They both understood such hollowing. "Sugar," Emma offered. "I'm afraid I have no cream fresh yet this morning." "Black is fine," Xavier replied. "Cream and sugar are luxuries on the trail. You're still driving cattle?" Emma asked, sitting across from him with her own cup. Xavier took a sip of his coffee, nodding appreciatively at the flavor before responding. "Not as much as I used to. Bought my ranch 5 years back, been building my own herd since then. Still do some contract work for the bigger outfits when they need experienced hands for the drive to Kansas." "Is it true what they say about cattle drives, that they're as dangerous as the dime novels make out?" Emma had read a few such stories in the quiet evenings alone, borrowed from the small lending library in town before people started avoiding her. A smile tugged at Xavier's mouth. "Some parts. River crossings can be treacherous. Stampedes are real enough and deadly when they happen. But most days it's just dust, monotony, and saddle sores." He took another drink of coffee. "Though I did once see a man fight off a mountain lion with just a hunting knife." "No," Emma exclaimed, caught up in the story. "God's truth," Xavier confirmed. "Fellow named Harlan Monroe. Mexican vaquero taught him that trick with the knife. Cat had already mauled 2 steers. What happened to Mr. Monroe? Last I heard, he was ranching down near the border. Carries those scars like badges of honor." Xavier's expression grew more serious. "But enough about old trail stories. How are you really doing after yesterday?" Emma's smile faded. "I'm fine. It wasn't the first time I've faced such accusations, though it was certainly the most public confrontation." "It shouldn't have happened at all," Xavier said, a hint of anger returning to his voice. "People fear what they don't understand," Emma replied with a small shrug. "And fear needs somewhere to go. That's mighty generous of you." "Not generous. Practical. Understanding why people behave as they do helps me navigate around their fears." Emma traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "Though I admit, yesterday tested my patience more than usual." Xavier studied her with an intensity that might have made Emma uncomfortable if not for the genuine concern behind it. "You mentioned you were planning to move on. Is that still your intention?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to voice. "I don't know," Emma admitted. "Before yesterday, yes, absolutely, but now I'm wondering if running is the right answer, if it ever was." She met his gaze steadily. "Your standing up for me meant something. It showed me that perhaps not everyone in Fort Worth is determined to see the worst in me." Xavier set down his cup. "There are good people here, folks who might surprise you if given the chance." "Like you surprised me?" Emma asked softly. A flicker of something passed across Xavier's face, vulnerability perhaps, or recognition. "I should have spoken sooner. I knew the talk was unfair." "Why didn't you?" The question wasn't accusatory, merely curious. Xavier considered before answering. "Partly because I didn't think it was my place, partly because—" He paused, seemingly unsure whether to continue, Because, Emma prompted. Because I didn't want to draw attention to my interest in you, he finished, his directness catching Emma off guard. Your interest, she repeated, the word strange on her tongue. Yes, Miss Langley, my interest. Xavier's gaze was unwavering now. I've watched you rebuild your life here with courage and dignity, seen how you help others even when they're unkind in return. Those are rare qualities. Emma felt heat rising to her cheeks. Mr. Northwood, Xavier, he corrected gently. Xavier, she amended. I'm flattered, truly, but you must see how impossible this is. Yesterday you defended me against accusations of witchcraft. The town barely tolerates my presence as it is. If they thought you and I were, she couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. I don't much care what people think, Xavier stated plainly. Never have. It's a luxury afforded to those who own their land and answer to no boss. A luxury I don't share, Emma countered. I rely on selling my remedies, on trading with townsfolk who already view me with suspicion. If they believed I had bewitched one of Fort Worth's most eligible bachelors, it would only confirm their worst fears about me. Xavier's expression darkened. I'm not some green boy to be bewitched, as you put it. I'm 34 years old and know my own mind. I didn't mean to suggest, Emma began, but Xavier continued. I understand your concerns. They're valid from your perspective. But I want you to consider something. This town respects success and standing. If the drought breaks and this rain suggests it might if your name is connected to someone they trust, perceptions can change. Is that what you're offering? Respectability by association? Emma asked, a hint of steel entering her voice. Xavier's eyes widened slightly. No, that came out wrong. What I'm offering is friendship, Miss Langley. For now. A public acknowledgement that you are worthy of respect and fair treatment. The rest. He paused. The rest is up to time and circumstance. Emma considered his words. Friendship with Xavier Northwood would indeed change her standing in town, for better or worse. But was she willing to risk the fragile stability she'd built for herself? I don't need a champion, Mr. Northwood, she said finally, but I could use a friend. Xavier's expression lightened. Then a friend you shall have. Their conversation shifted then to more neutral topics: his ranch, her garden, the prospects for better weather. When Xavier finally rose to leave an hour later, something had changed between them, a foundation laid for whatever might come next. At the door, Xavier paused. Would you consider joining me for dinner at the hotel restaurant next Saturday? As friends, he added quickly. It would give the town something concrete to replace their speculations. Emma's initial instinct was to refuse. Dining in public with Xavier would be like walking into the lion's den. But she was tired of hiding, tired of letting fear dictate her choices. Yes, she said, surprising herself with her decisiveness. I would like that. Xavier's smile was worth whatever consequences might come. I'll call for you at 6 then. As she watched him ride away, Emma felt a curious mixture of trepidation and exhilaration. For better or worse, her life in Fort Worth had just taken another unexpected turn. The days leading up to Saturday passed with excruciating slowness. Emma went about her usual routines, tending her garden, preparing herbal mixtures, caring for her animals, but her mind constantly returned to the upcoming dinner. What would people say? How would they react? More practically, what would she wear? Her wardrobe was limited to practical work dresses, and one slightly better dress she wore for trips to town. None seemed appropriate for dining at Fort Worth's only proper restaurant with a man of Xavier's standing. On Thursday, Emma made the decision to visit the dressmaker in town. It would strain her budget, but she refused to embarrass Xavier by appearing dowdy or unkempt. The prospect of facing the town's scrutiny again made her stomach clench, but she squared her shoulders and hitched her wagon anyway. Fort Worth seemed different as she drove down the main street. The rain had continued intermittently throughout the week, bringing relief from the oppressive heat and dust. People moved with more energy, and Emma noticed that while some still crossed to the other side of the street to avoid her, others nodded politely or even smiled. Outside the Mercantile, Emma was surprised to see Mrs. Peterson, whose baby she had treated during the winter. "Miss Langley," Mrs. Peterson called, approaching the wagon. "I've been hoping to see you. Little Samuel has been asking for the honey drops you made him last time. His cough is back, though not as bad." Emma smiled, genuinely pleased to see the woman. "I have some with me, actually. I always carry a few remedies when I come to town." As she handed over the small paper package of honey and herb drops, Mrs. Peterson leaned closer. "I want you to know my husband and I never believed those awful things people were saying. We know a drought is just a drought, and Samuel wouldn't be here without your help last winter." Touched, Emma struggled to find words. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. That means more than you know." Mrs. Peterson glanced around before adding in a lower voice, "And we're not the only ones. Mr. Northwood standing up for you got a lot of folks thinking. He's respected here. If he says you're good folk, well, many are inclined to believe him." So Xavier had been right. His intervention was already shifting perceptions. Emma wasn't naive enough to think all prejudice would vanish overnight, but even this small change gave her hope. At the dressmaker's shop, Emma braced herself for rejection or cold treatment. Instead, Miss Finley welcomed her warmly. "Miss Langley, come in. I was just saying to Mrs. Wilson yesterday that we haven't seen you in an age." The plump, cheerful woman ushered Emma inside. "What can I help you with today?" Slightly taken aback by the friendly reception, Emma explained her need for a dinner dress, suitable for the hotel restaurant. Miss Finley's eyes lit up with professional interest. "For this Saturday with Mr. Northwood. My dear, the whole town is talking about it." Emma felt her cheeks flush. "It's just dinner between friends." Miss Finley winked. "Of course it is. Now let me see what I have that might work on short notice." She bustled around the shop, pulling out fabric samples. "You know, I've always thought a deep green would complement your coloring beautifully. Brings out the amber in your eyes." 2 hours later, Emma left the shop with the promise that a dress would be ready by Saturday morning, a simple but elegant design in forest green that would be fitted from one of Miss Finley's existing patterns. It was more than Emma had planned to spend, but the dressmaker had been unexpectedly accommodating about payment terms. As Emma prepared to leave town, she noticed Xavier coming out of the bank. He spotted her at the same moment, and his face brightened in a way that sent a flutter through Emma's chest. He crossed the street to her wagon with long, purposeful strides. "Miss Langley," he greeted her, tipping his hat. "A pleasant surprise." "Mr. Northwood," she returned with a small smile. "I had some errands in town." "Everything all right?" he asked, his tone suggesting he was concerned about her reception after the events in the town square. "Surprisingly, yes," Emma admitted. "Better than expected, in fact." Xavier nodded, looking pleased but not surprised. "Good. People come around given time and a push in the right direction." "Is that what you gave them? A push?" A hint of mischief appeared in Xavier's eyes. "Let's just say I've had some conversations with influential citizens about the scientific causes of drought and the economic benefits of having a skilled herbalist in our community." Emma couldn't help but laugh. "Very diplomatic of you." "I have my moments," Xavier replied with a grin that transformed his usually serious face. "Are we still on for Saturday?" "Yes," Emma confirmed. 6 o'clock. I'll be there." Xavier stepped back from the wagon. "Safe journey home." Emma felt the weight of curious stares as she drove away. But for once, they didn't seem hostile, merely interested in this unexpected development between the town's most eligible rancher and the woman they had so recently condemned. Saturday arrived clear and mild, the string of rainy days having broken to reveal a perfect late summer evening. Emma had spent the morning collecting the dress from Miss Finley, who had outdone herself with the rushed creation. The deep green fabric draped elegantly, the cut modest but flattering to Emma's slender figure. As 6 o'clock approached, Emma found herself more nervous than she had anticipated. It had been 2 years since she'd shared a meal with anyone other than occasional visitors to her cabin. The prospect of navigating dinner conversation, proper etiquette, and the inevitable stares of other diners made her stomach twist. She had just finished pinning up her hair in a simple but elegant style when she heard a wagon approaching. Taking a deep breath, Emma checked her appearance one final time in the small mirror. The woman who looked back at her seemed both familiar and strange, the same Emma Langley who had struggled and survived, but with a spark of something new in her eyes. Xavier's knock was firm but not intrusive. When Emma opened the door, she was momentarily struck speechless. He stood before her in a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and string tie, his usually wind-blown hair neatly combed. He had shaved, revealing a strong jawline often hidden by stubble. He looked every inch the successful rancher, but it was the appreciative warmth in his eyes as he took in her appearance that made Emma's pulse quicken. "Miss Langley," Xavier said, his voice slightly lower than usual. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," Emma replied, suddenly shy. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Northwood." A smile curved his mouth. "Figured if we're going to give people something to talk about, we might as well make it worth their while." The ride to town in Xavier's well-sprung buggy was pleasant. The cooling evening air carrying the scent of rain, washed earth, and late summer wildflowers. Their conversation flowed easily, touching on books they had both read, observations about the changing weather, and humorous anecdotes from Xavier's early days as a cowhand. "I was 17 and greener than spring grass," he told her, describing his first cattle drive. "Thought I knew everything about horses because I'd been riding since I was 5. The trail boss, old Hank Morgan, paired me with the orneriest mount in the remuda, a nasty piebald gelding named Satan's Kiss." Emma laughed at his description of being thrown repeatedly, until he learned the horse responded only to Spanish commands, a trick the vaqueros had taught it. "That horse taught me more about humility in 3 days than my pa managed in 17 years. Xavier concluded as they reached the outskirts of Fort Worth. As they drove down the main street, Emma felt the familiar weight of stares, but held her head high. Xavier seemed completely at ease, nodding to acquaintances as they passed. When they reached the Grand Hotel, a stable boy hurried forward to take the horses, and Xavier came around to help Emma down from the buggy. His hand was warm and strong around hers, steadying her as her feet touched the ground. For a moment, they stood closer than propriety strictly allowed, and Emma caught the clean scent of his shaving soap mingled with something uniquely him. "Ready?" Xavier asked quietly. Emma nodded, tucking her hand into the crook of his offered arm. Together, they ascended the hotel's front steps and entered the lobby. The dining room of the Grand Hotel was the finest establishment in Fort Worth, with white tablecloths, silver cutlery, and crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandeliers overhead. At this hour, it was nearly full, and a noticeable hush fell over the room as Xavier and Emma were shown to their table. Emma kept her gaze forward, her back straight, though she could feel the weight of dozens of curious eyes. Xavier, for his part, seemed completely untroubled, His manner relaxed as he held her chair and then took his own seat across from her. "Quite a crowd tonight," he commented mildly, as if they were discussing the weather. "Indeed," Emma replied, grateful that her voice remained steady. Their waiter approached, his professional demeanor betraying no surprise at seeing Emma Langley dining with Xavier Northwood. "Good evening, Mr. Northwood, Miss Langley. Our special tonight is roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, and we have both trout and chicken as alternatives." Xavier looked to Emma. "What would you prefer?" "The trout sounds lovely," she replied, touched by the simple courtesy of being asked her preference first. "Excellent choice," Xavier agreed. "The same for me, and a bottle of white wine if you have it." "Very good, sir." As the waiter departed, Emma leaned slightly forward. "You didn't have to order wine. I know it's expensive." Xavier smiled. "It's a celebration." "Of what?" "Of new beginnings. Of rain after drought. Of fine company on a Saturday evening." Before Emma could respond, a shadow fell across their table. Looking up, she saw Mayor Harrison and his wife standing beside them, the mayor's expression unreadable while Mrs. Harrison looked torn between curiosity and disapproval. "Northwood," the mayor greeted. "Miss Langley. A surprise to see you dining out." Xavier rose smoothly. "Mayor, Mrs. Harrison, would you care to join us?" Emma held her breath. This was a test both of the mayor's true feelings and of Xavier's standing in the community. After a moment's hesitation, Mayor Harrison shook his head. "Thank you, but we're meeting the Prestons. I merely wanted to say that the town council is pleased about the recent rains. Perhaps the worst is behind us." "Let's hope so," Xavier agreed. "The forecasts from Dallas suggest we might see a wetter autumn than usual." "Good news for everyone," the mayor replied. Then, surprising Emma, he added, "Miss Langley, I understand from Doc Miller that your willow bark preparation helped Mrs. Harrison's cousin with her joint pain. We'd be obliged if you could prepare some for Mrs. Harrison as well." "Similar complaints, you understand." Momentarily stunned, Emma recovered quickly. "Of course, Mayor Harrison. I'd be happy to." Mrs. Harrison's lips thinned, but she nodded stiffly. The couple moved on to their own table, but the brief interaction had been witnessed by everyone in the dining room. The message was clear. If the mayor could acknowledge Emma civilly, so could others. "Well," Xavier said as he resumed his seat, "that was interesting." "Did you arrange that?" Emma asked suspiciously. Xavier raised his eyebrows. "The mayor stopping by our table." "I'm influential, Miss Langley, but not that influential. Though I did mention to Doc Miller last week that your remedies deserved wider recognition." Their meal arrived, temporarily halting further discussion. The trout was perfectly prepared, served with seasonal vegetables and new potatoes. Emma couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten food she hadn't cooked herself, and she savored each bite. As they dined, the initial tension in the room gradually dissipated. Conversations resumed at normal volume, though Emma occasionally caught snippets that included her name or Xavier's. She was acutely aware that they were creating what would become town gossip for weeks to come. "Tell me about your husband," Xavier said unexpectedly as they were finishing their main course. Emma looked up, surprised by the directness of the question. "Thomas," Xavier nodded. "If you don't mind speaking of him, I'd like to know more about the man you loved." There was no jealousy or discomfort in his tone, only genuine interest. Emma took a sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. "Thomas was a schoolteacher," she began. "Brilliant with numbers, patient with children, and absolutely hopeless at anything practical. He could explain complex mathematics, but couldn't hammer a nail straight." A fond smile touched her lips at the memory. "We met when I was 18. He came to our town in Pennsylvania to teach at the school and took a room at my parents' boarding house." "Love at first sight?" Xavier asked. Emma shook her head. Not at all. I thought he was terribly stuffy and too serious. He thought I was frivolous, because I spent so much time gathering plants and making remedies instead of focusing on proper subjects like literature and history. What changed? Influenza swept through town that winter. My mother and I were run ragged caring for the sick. Thomas volunteered to help, despite having no experience with illness. He read medical texts by night and assisted us by day. Emma's expression softened at the memory. He was so earnest, so determined to be useful. Somewhere between changing compresses and mixing medicines, we fell in love. Xavier listened intently, his blue eyes never leaving her face. He sounds like a good man. He was, Emma confirmed. We had 4 wonderful years together before the typhoid took him. I learned later he'd been visiting a family outside town where several children were sick. Always putting others first, even at his own risk. And after, Xavier prompted gently, Emma's expression clouded. After was difficult. I stayed in our town for 6 months, but everywhere I looked I saw him. Every corner held a memory, and people meant well, but their pity was suffocating. She paused. So I came west thinking I could start fresh where no one knew my story. Only to find new challenges, Xavier observed. Yes, Emma agreed. Though perhaps it was naive to think I could escape grief by changing my location. Not naive, Xavier countered. Human. We all seek relief from pain in our own ways. There was something in his tone that sparked Emma's curiosity. And how did you seek relief, Xavier? You mentioned understanding what it's like to be judged for circumstances beyond your control. Xavier was silent for a long moment, swirling the remaining wine in his glass. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. My mother was Comanche, he said simply. Emma's eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent, recognizing the significance of his trust in sharing this with her. My father was a cavalry officer who fell in love with her when she was working as a translator at the fort. She'd been educated by missionaries after her family died in a smallpox epidemic. Xavier's gaze was distant now, looking back through years. They married despite the scandal. He resigned his commission and they started ranching in the Panhandle. That must have been difficult for them, Emma observed. Xavier nodded. For all of us. I was too Indian for the white folks, too white for the Indians. My parents endured gossip, refused business threats. But they were stubborn, and they loved each other fiercely. Are they still? Emma left the question unfinished. No, Xavier replied, his expression closing briefly before he continued. Raid on our ranch when I was 15. Renegades, white men pretending to be Comanche to cover their tracks. My father died defending the house. My mother. He paused. She was taken, never found. Xavier, I'm so sorry, Emma said softly, instinctively reaching across the table to touch his hand. He turned his palm up, briefly squeezing her fingers before releasing them, mindful of their public setting. It was a long time ago. My point is, I understand what it means to be judged unfairly, to have people look at you and see only what they fear or don't understand. The connection between them deepened with this shared understanding. They were both outsiders in different ways, both familiar with loss and resilience. As they finished their meal with coffee and apple pie, their conversation lightened again, but the foundation had shifted. They had moved beyond curiosity and attraction to something more substantial: mutual recognition and respect. When they finally left the restaurant, Emma was surprised to realize nearly 3 hours had passed. The dining room had largely emptied, though a few lingering patrons still cast curious glances their way. Outside, the night had grown cooler, and Xavier draped his jacket over Emma's shoulders without asking. The simple gesture of care warmed her more than the garment itself. The drive back to Emma's cabin was quiet but comfortable, the silence between them no longer awkward but filled with unspoken understanding. When they arrived, Xavier insisted on seeing her to the door. On the porch, illuminated only by the light spilling from the window where Emma had left a lamp burning, they faced each other. "Thank you for a lovely evening," Emma said sincerely. "It was unexpected in many ways." Xavier smiled, the expression softening his strong features. "Good unexpected, I hope." "Very good," she confirmed, returning his smile. "Then perhaps you'd consider joining me for a picnic next weekend. I know a spot by the creek on my property where the cottonwoods provide perfect shade." Emma hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that very much." Xavier took her hand then, raising it to his lips in a gesture that belonged to an earlier, more formal time. The brush of his mouth against her skin sent a shiver through Emma that had nothing to do with the evening chill. "Good night, Emma Langley," he said, using her first name for the first time. "Good night, Xavier," she replied softly. As she watched him drive away, Emma knew with absolute certainty that her life in Fort Worth had changed irrevocably. The question now was whether she had the courage to embrace that change fully. The picnic, the following weekend, marked the beginning of a courtship that progressed with the steady, unhurried confidence that characterized Xavier himself. Through September and into October, as the rains continued, and the land slowly recovered from the drought, Xavier and Emma spent increasingly more time together. They rode across his sprawling ranch, Xavier showing Emma his prize cattle and the improvements he'd made to the old farmhouse he'd purchased with his savings. They explored the creek that connected their properties, identifying medicinal plants that grew along its banks. On Sundays, they attended church together, Emma initially tense under the congregation's scrutiny, but gradually relaxing as acceptance or at least tolerance replaced suspicion. Not everyone approved, of course. Constance Pritchard still crossed the street to avoid Emma, and a few of the older ranching families viewed Xavier's interest in the herb woman with skepticism. But most people followed the mayor's lead, treating Emma with cautious civility that slowly warmed as they saw Xavier's unwavering support. Emma continued her work with herbal remedies, finding that her services were increasingly in demand as word spread of the efficacy of her treatments. Doc Miller, overworked and aging, began to refer patients to her for minor ailments, officially recognizing what many had known unofficially, that Emma Langley had a gift for healing. As October turned to November, bringing crisp mornings and early frosts, Emma found herself contemplating a future she hadn't dared imagine since Thomas's death. Xavier had become essential to her life, his steady presence, his quiet strength, his unexpected flashes of humor. She thought of him in the moments before sleep, and looked for him in every crowd when she visited town. They had not spoken explicitly of marriage or commitment, though Xavier's intentions seemed clear in his actions. He introduced her to his few close friends, consulted her on improvements to his ranch house, and spoke of future seasons as if it were understood she would be part of them. On a clear, cold afternoon in mid-November, Emma was working in her garden, harvesting the last of her herbs before winter set in fully. She had just straightened, pressing a hand to her lower back, when she saw a cloud of dust approaching along the road, a rider coming fast. Her heart quickened, thinking it might be Xavier, but as the horse drew nearer, she recognized Sheriff Walker. His expression was grim as he reined in his horse at her gate. "Miss Langley," he called, dismounting quickly. "I need you to come with me. There's been an accident at the Northwood ranch." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "Xavier, he's alive," the sheriff assured her quickly, "but badly hurt. Bull gored him while they were moving the herd to winter pasture. His foreman sent for Doc Miller, but the doc's away delivering the Peterson twins up north. "I'll get my supplies," Emma said, already moving toward the house, her mind racing. Bull goring puncture wounds, possible internal bleeding, infection risks. Within minutes, she had packed her largest basket with herbs, tinctures, bandages, and the surgical kit she'd acquired from a retired Army doctor. The sheriff helped her into his wagon, and they set off at the fastest pace the horses could manage. "How bad is it?" Emma asked as they rattled along the road. Sheriff Walker kept his eyes on the trail. "Bad enough. Caught him in the side. They've got the bleeding slowed, but he's in a lot of pain." Emma nodded grimly, mentally reviewing everything she knew about treating such wounds. The risk of infection was high, and without proper medical attention, many men died from injuries like this. Xavier's ranch house came into view after what seemed an eternity, a solid two-story structure of stone and timber that spoke of permanence and prosperity. Men were gathered on the porch, their faces somber, hats in hands. Emma didn't wait for the wagon to fully stop before jumping down, basket in hand. Xavier's foreman, Miguel Vasquez, hurried to meet her. "He's upstairs, Miss Langley, first room on the right." "We've done what we can," but the worry in his dark eyes told Emma more than his words. She nodded, already moving toward the door. "Keep water boiling. I'll need clean cloths, as many as you have." The bedroom was dim, curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. Xavier lay on the large bed, his skin ashen against the white sheets, which were stained crimson despite the bandages pressed to his side. His eyes were closed, his breathing labored. Emma set down her basket and moved to his side, professional calm overtaking her personal fear. She gently touched his forehead, hot but not dangerously so yet. His eyes opened at her touch, clouded with pain but focusing on her face. "Emma," he rasped, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace. "Some welcome to my home." "Hush," she said gently, already examining the makeshift bandages his men had applied. "Save your strength." The next hours passed in a blur of focused activity. Emma cleaned the wound, a deep puncture in Xavier's left side that had mercifully missed vital organs but torn through muscle and tissue. She applied poultices to draw out infection, stitched what could be stitched, and prepared tinctures for pain and fever. Throughout, Xavier remained conscious, bearing the pain with a stoicism that both impressed and worried Emma. Only when she ground willow bark with a splash of whiskey did he accept something for the pain, and even then, he insisted she use her supplies sparingly. "Others might need them more," he told her, his voice weak but determined. "Right now, you need them most," Emma countered firmly, pressing the cup to his lips. As evening fell, Emma finally sat back, exhausted but satisfied that she had done all she could. The wound was clean, properly dressed, and showing no immediate signs of infection. Xavier's fever remained low grade, his pulse steady if somewhat rapid. Miguel knocked softly, entering with a tray bearing a bowl of stew and fresh coffee. "For you, Miss Langley. The men and I thought you might need sustenance." Emma accepted gratefully, suddenly aware she hadn't eaten since breakfast. "Thank you, Miguel, and please thank the others for their help." The foreman nodded, his gaze moving to his employer. "Will he recover?" "If infection doesn't set in, yes," Emma replied honestly. "The next day or two will tell." "He is strong," Miguel said, a simple statement of fact. "And now he has reason to fight harder than ever before." His dark eyes met Emma's meaningfully before he quietly withdrew. Emma ate quickly, then settled into the chair beside Xavier's bed for what she knew would be a long night of vigilance. Outside, she could hear the men talking quietly on the porch, a few departing for their own homes or the bunkhouse while others volunteered to stay in case they were needed. As midnight approached, Xavier stirred, his eyes opening clearer than before. "You're still here," he observed, his voice stronger. "Of course I'm still here," Emma replied, moving to check his bandages. "Did you think I'd patch you up and leave?" A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. "Not your style." "No," she agreed, satisfied that the dressings remained clean and dry. "How's the pain? Manageable?" He caught her hand as she withdrew it from his forehead. "Emma, if this goes badly—" "It won't," she interrupted firmly. "If it does," he persisted, "I need you to know something." Emma fell silent, recognizing the need in his eyes. "I love you," Xavier said simply. "Have since the day you stood in that town square, facing down hatred with nothing but dignity and courage. Should have told you sooner." Tears pricked at Emma's eyes, but she blinked them away. "You're telling me now," she said softly, "and you'll have plenty of time to tell me again because you're going to recover fully." "Yes, madam," he agreed, his eyes already drifting closed again. But his hand remained wrapped around hers, a lifeline in the quiet darkness. Emma maintained her vigil through the night, checking Xavier's wound, monitoring his fever, and administering herbal tinctures as needed. By dawn, she was swaying with exhaustion, but Xavier's condition had stabilized, his fever even slightly reduced. When Miguel brought fresh coffee and biscuits, Emma provided a cautiously optimistic report. "If we can keep infection at bay for another day or two, he should recover. But he'll need weeks of rest to heal completely." "Good luck keeping him still that long," Miguel commented wryly. "Mr. Northwood doesn't know the meaning of rest." "He'll learn," Emma replied with quiet determination that made the foreman hide a smile. The day passed slowly, with Xavier sleeping fitfully and Emma catching brief moments of rest in the chair beside his bed. Sheriff Walker returned with word that Doc Miller was expected back the following day and would come directly to the ranch. Several of Xavier's neighbors rode in, offering assistance with his cattle and bringing food prepared by their wives, concrete evidence of his standing in the community. By evening, Emma was certain the greatest danger had passed. Xavier's fever was almost gone, the wound remained clean, and he was able to take broth and water. His strength was returning, along with his characteristic stubbornness. "I need to check on the north pasture," he insisted, attempting to sit up before Emma firmly pressed him back against the pillows. "The only place you're going is straight back to sleep," she informed him. "Miguel has everything under control." Xavier subsided with a grimace. "This isn't how I imagined getting you into my bedroom for the first time." The unexpected comment startled a laugh from Emma. "Xavier Northwood, I believe that fever affected your brain." His blue eyes held a mischievous glint that reassured her more than any medical sign. "No fever, just truth." His expression grew more serious. "I meant what I said last night, Emma." "I know you did," she replied softly. "You didn't say it back," he pointed out. Emma gently brushed a lock of dark hair from his forehead. "Because you were half delirious with pain and needed rest, not conversation." And now, looking into his eyes clear, intense, and filled with an emotion that made her breath catch, Emma felt the last of her reservations melt away. "And now I'll tell you that I love you too, and have for longer than I was willing to admit even to myself." Xavier's smile was like sunrise breaking across his face. "Good, that's settled then." "What's settled?" Emma asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "That as soon as I'm back on my feet, we're getting married, if you're agreeable, that is." The directness of his proposal, so typical of the man, made Emma both laugh and tear up. Just like that. No romantic speech. No getting down on one knee. "I'm improvising, considering I'm currently stuck in this bed," Xavier pointed out reasonably. but I can provide all the traditional elements once I'm mobile again, if you prefer." Emma shook her head, smiling through tears that now flowed freely. "No need. Yes is my answer, regardless of how you ask." Xavier reached for her hand, drawing her down until their faces were close. "I'll give you the life you deserve, Emma Langley. A home where you're respected, not feared. Children, if you want them. Safety. Belonging. All I want is you," Emma whispered. "The rest is extra blessing." Their first kiss was gentle, mindful of Xavier's injury but filled with promise. When they separated, both were smiling. "Now rest," Emma instructed, her tone professional once more despite her flushed cheeks. "Doctor's orders." "Yes, madam," Xavier agreed, settling back against the pillows. "Though I should warn you, I may be a difficult patient." "I expected nothing less," Emma replied dryly. Doc Miller arrived the following morning, examining Xavier with professional thoroughness before pronouncing himself impressed with Emma's treatment. "Couldn't have done better myself," the elderly physician admitted, repacking his bag. "Those stitches are neater than mine, too." "Emma has many talents," Xavier commented, his tone making the doctor raise an eyebrow. "So I see," Doc Miller replied. "Well, young man, you're lucky. Another inch to the right and we'd be having a very different conversation. As it is, you'll need at least 6 weeks of limited activity to let that muscle heal properly." Xavier frowned. 6 weeks? "Doc, I have a ranch to run." "And capable men to help you run it," Emma interjected. "Unless you'd prefer to permanently damage yourself." The doctor chuckled at Xavier's defeated expression. "I'd listen to her if I were you, Northwood. She clearly has your number." He turned to Emma. "Continue with the willow bark for pain and fever. The poultice you're using is excellent, better than my standard treatment, honestly. Change the dressings twice daily and watch for any signs of infection." As the doctor prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Miss Langley, when you're not busy tending to our stubborn friend here, I'd like to discuss the possibility of you assisting me more formally. Fort Worth is growing and I'm not getting any younger. Your knowledge of herbal medicine complements my conventional training nicely." Emma was momentarily speechless. I'd be honored, doctor." "Good, good. We'll talk details later." Doc Miller tipped his hat. "Congratulations to you both, by the way. Miguel mentioned there might be wedding bells in the future." After he'd gone, Emma turned to Xavier with mock severity. "Your entire ranch knows we're engaged, and it's been less than a day." Xavier had the grace to look slightly sheepish. "Ranch hands talk, and Miguel has known my intentions toward you for months." "Months?" Emma repeated, surprised. "You've been planning this for months?" "Emma, I've been planning this since I defended you in the town square," Xavier admitted. "Just had to convince you to give Fort Worth and me a chance." The weeks of Xavier's recovery passed more quickly than either expected. Emma divided her time between her cabin, where she continued to prepare remedies and see patients as Doc Miller had recommended, and Xavier's ranch house, where she supervised his healing and gradually became accustomed to what would soon be her home. The ranching community, initially surprised by news of their engagement, rallied around them with the practical support typical of frontier society. The women brought food and sewing when visiting. The men helped with Xavier's cattle, and plans for a spring wedding began to take shape. Even in Fort Worth itself, attitudes continued to shift. Emma's role in saving Xavier's life, combined with Doc Miller's public endorsement of her skills, transformed her from suspected witch to valuable healer in the eyes of many. While some, like the Pritchards, maintained their distance, most townsfolk now greeted her with respect or even warmth. By Christmas, Xavier was sufficiently recovered to ride short distances, though Emma insisted he avoid any strenuous activity. They celebrated the holiday quietly at the ranch house, exchanging simple gifts before a roaring fire, Emma giving Xavier a hand-knitted scarf. Xavier presenting Emma with a delicate gold locket containing miniature portraits of both her parents, which he'd commissioned from a traveling artist using photographs Emma had shown him. "For something old to wear at our wedding," he explained as she gasped at the thoughtful gift. "Something that reminds you that your past is always part of you, even as we build our future." Winter settled over Fort Worth, bringing occasional snow and long evenings perfect for planning. They decided on an April wedding, when the wildflowers would be blooming across the prairie. Emma would wear her mother's lace veil, sent by her sister in Pennsylvania after Emma wrote with the news. Xavier's groomsmen would include Miguel and Sheriff Walker, while Emma asked Mrs. Peterson and Doc Miller's daughter to stand with her. On a crystal-clear day in late January, Xavier drove Emma out to a hilltop overlooking his ranch, their first real excursion since his injury. Below them stretched the winter-brown pastures where cattle grazed, the creek that wound through the property like a silver ribbon, and in the distance, the outline of Fort Worth. "What do you see?" Xavier asked as they stood together, his arm around her shoulders. Emma surveyed the landscape. "I see land with good bones, fertile soil waiting for spring, water that never fully dried up even in drought." She turned to him. "I see home." Xavier's kiss was tender, a promise sealed against the winter wind. When they separated, he gestured to a flat area near the creek. "I thought we might build there eventually. A bigger house, for when we need more room." Emma followed his gaze, understanding his meaning. "For children, you mean?" "If you want them," Xavier said, watching her carefully. Emma thought of the emptiness that had followed Thomas's death, the longing for the family they'd planned but never had. "I do want them. Very much." Xavier's smile was brighter than the winter sun. "I was hoping you'd say that. My mother believed children were the Creator's greatest blessing." "A wise woman," Emma replied, leaning into his warmth. "I wish I could have known her." "She would have loved you," Xavier said with certainty. "Strong women recognize each other." As they stood together looking out over what would be their shared future, Emma felt a sense of completion she had thought lost forever. The drought that had nearly destroyed her life in Fort Worth had, through a strange twist of fate, led her to this moment, to love found unexpectedly, to community slowly earned, to purpose renewed. "We should head back," Xavier said eventually. "Storms coming in from the north." Emma nodded but lingered a moment longer, committing the view to memory. "Xavier, thank you for defending me that day in the town square." He turned her to face him, his expression serious. "You never have to thank me for that, Emma. Never." "I know," she acknowledged. "But I wanted to say it anyway. If you hadn't spoken up." "If I hadn't, someone else would have eventually," Xavier said. "Good people can't stand by forever while injustice happens. It just took someone to go first." Emma wasn't so sure, but she loved him all the more for his faith in human nature. "Well, I'm glad it was you who went first." Their April wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush carpeting the prairie in a riot of color. The ceremony, held in Fort Worth's small church, was attended by nearly the entire community, a testament to how far perceptions had shifted in less than a year. Emma wore a simple cream dress with her mother's veil and the gold locket Xavier had given her at Christmas. Xavier, standing tall and fully recovered at the altar, watched her walk down the aisle with an expression of such undisguised love that several of the women in attendance dabbed at their eyes. Their vows were straightforward but heartfelt, promising partnership, respect, and enduring love. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier's kiss was both tender and possessive, drawing cheers from his ranch hands and tactful coughs from the more conservative townsfolk. The celebration afterward, held at Xavier's ranch now, their ranch lasted well into the evening. There was music, dancing, and enough food to feed 3 counties, as Emma later joked. Even the Pritchards made a brief appearance, Constance stiffly presenting a hand-embroidered tablecloth as a wedding gift, perhaps not forgiveness, but a step toward civility. As twilight fell and the last guests departed, Xavier led Emma to the porch of what was now their home. Inside, candles had been lit in their bedroom, the sheets turned down, Miguel's wife's discreet preparation for the newlyweds. "Happy, Mrs. Northwood?" Xavier asked, his arms around her waist as they watched the first stars appear. "Completely," Emma confirmed, leaning back against his chest. "Although I'm keeping Langley for my medical practice. Dr. Emma Langley has a professional ring to it, don't you think?" Xavier chuckled, the sound rumbling against her back. "Whatever you prefer. I'm secure enough to handle my wife having her own name for business." Emma turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "You're a remarkable man, Xavier Northwood." "And you're a remarkable woman, Emma Langley Northwood," he replied, lowering his mouth to hers. "Now, shall we go inside? I believe we have some private celebrations to attend to." Later, as they lay entwined in the soft darkness of their bedroom, Emma thought of the journey that had brought them here from accusations in a drought-stricken town square to this moment of perfect belonging. Life on the frontier would never be easy, but facing it together made even the harshest challenges seem manageable. "What are you thinking about so intently?" Xavier murmured against her hair. "How strange life's paths can be," Emma replied honestly. "If not for the drought, if not for the accusations, we might never have truly seen each other." Xavier's arms tightened around her. "I'd have found you anyway," he said with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be, regardless of the route." Emma smiled in the darkness, content to believe him. Perhaps he was right, perhaps they would have found each other through some other twist of fate, but she was grateful for the path they had traveled, difficult as it had been. It had forged a bond between them that she knew, with absolute certainty, would weather whatever storms the future might bring outside. A gentle rain began to fall, nourishing the land that had once been parched and hostile. Inside, Emma and Xavier Northwood slept in each other's arms, their shared dreams as promising as the fertile earth after drought, ready for whatever they might plant together in the seasons to come. Epilogue. 5 years later, Emma Northwood stood on the porch of the new house, the larger one Xavier had envisioned that day on the hilltop, watching her husband teach their 3-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his pony. Xavier's patience seemed infinite as he led the small, dappled pony in circles, one hand steady on Thomas's back while the boy clutched the saddle horn with determined concentration. At Emma's feet, their 1-year-old daughter, Sarah, played with wooden blocks, occasionally looking up to clap as her brother completed another circuit. The children were as different as could be: Thomas dark-haired and serious like his father, Sarah fair and adventurous like her mother had been as a child. From inside the house came the sounds of Mrs. Vasquez preparing dinner. The foreman's wife had become Emma's right hand as the ranch prospered and Emma's medical practice grew. Between patients, children, and ranch responsibilities, extra help had proven necessary, a luxury Emma sometimes still found hard to accept. Fort Worth itself had grown substantially, the railroad's arrival 3 years earlier transforming the once sleepy town into a bustling hub. Emma now shared a proper office with Doc Miller 2 days a week, their complementary approaches to medicine drawing patients from as far as Dallas. The accusations of witchcraft seemed like a distant dream. though occasionally Emma still caught Constance Pritchard eyeing her suspiciously in church. Xavier completed the riding lesson, lifting Thomas from the pony with exaggerated praise for the boy's skill. Thomas beamed with pride, then ran toward the porch as fast as his little legs would carry him. "Mama, did you see? I stayed on all by myself." Emma knelt to catch her son in a hug. "I saw. You're becoming quite the horseman." Xavier followed more slowly, leading the pony back toward the barn where Miguel would care for it. His hair now had threads of silver at the temples, but otherwise he looked much as he had the day he defended her in the town square, strong, steady, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. "He's a natural," Xavier called. "Gets it from his mother." Emma laughed. "I think we both know which parent gave him his riding ability." As Xavier approached the porch, Sarah abandoned her blocks, raising her arms imperiously. "Up, Papa," Xavier obliged, swinging his daughter into the air before settling her against his hip. "How's my princess today?" "Block," Sarah informed him solemnly, showing him the wooden cube clutched in her tiny fist. "Very impressive," Xavier agreed, climbing the steps to join Emma and Thomas on the porch. Emma leaned into his side, savoring the moment her family together, safe and thriving on land that had once seemed so hostile. The drought that had nearly destroyed her life had ultimately led to its greatest blessings. "Rider coming," Xavier observed, nodding toward the road where a plume of dust signaled an approaching horseman. As the figure drew nearer, Emma recognized Sheriff Walker's deputy. The young man reined in at their gate, removing his hat as he approached the house. "Mrs. Northwood, Sheriff sends his apologies for the interruption, but there's been an accident at the Miller place. Their boy fell from the hayloft. Doc's away in Dallas for that medical conference, and the sheriff thought you might." "Of course," Emma replied immediately. "Let me get my bag." Xavier nodded. "I'll saddle your horse." Within minutes, Emma was ready, her medical bag far more extensive than the basket she'd once carried secured to her saddle. She kissed each child, then Xavier, before mounting her mare. "Don't wait dinner," she instructed. "This may take some time." Xavier's hand rested briefly on her knee. "Be safe. We'll be here when you return." As Emma rode away beside the deputy, she glanced back once at the tableau on the porch, Xavier with a child in each arm, all three waving. Her heart swelled with gratitude for this life she had never dared to imagine during those dark days when the town had turned against her. The failed harvest that had once marked her as an outcast had, in the end, yielded the richest crop of all: love, family, purpose, and a place to truly call home.